Okay, so I thought it would make sense in a podcast and learning through experience to walk the talk and take some reflection time at the end with the idea that experience itself isn't enough to promote learning, but we need to pair that with reflection. And ideally, our reflection happens before, during, and after. So this is the end of season 3, and we've had a good season, and I'm delighted to take a look back at some of my own experience and reflections. So I thought I would bring a few things today. First of all, I've just come back from some travel. So it was a few weeks ago that we wrapped up the last episode with Amy Bloom. And I've since then had a chance to spend some time in Paris and south of France and Singapore and Bali. So I've gotten some distance. And so I don't really have planned remarks so much as I wanted to come and talk a little bit about some things that are just with me as I'm thinking about the season. This season was intended to echo some of the themes in the interpersonal and group dynamics course, this popular memory maker transformational experience that I've been teaching at Yale for more than 2 decades. And I wanted to bring some of the energy of that course into the podcast and some of the energy of this podcast into the course. And I think it wound up feeling like a distant echo to me, in part because I didn't take it on as a really explicit one-to-one connection with each session, but a more evocative. And secondly, because the whole semester wound up being more packed than I thought it would be because I was missing a key staff member. My beloved Valerie Bellinger, who has worked with me for 10 years, moved on to exciting new pastures, and we had a gap that we're still in. And so I was taking on the role of the associate director. I did the best I could, and while doing my other kind of full-time teaching job. And I really wanted to keep the podcast going, and so I spent a lot of time on the podcast. And so just an acknowledgement that part of what was happening is that there was just a lot going on. So some empathy and compassion and understanding that it's really hard to find time for high quality reflection in a very busy life where there are a lot of fires to put out and to keep the trains running. And I had a first person experience of that, certainly over the last few months. And it was important to me to keep things going. And one of the things that was most important to me was the podcast. And I feel like I did less reflection during the semester than I usually would hope to do. There's that as a start point. But there were some great conversations in there. And I wanted to say some of the things that really stood out to me. Started the podcast with a kind of redefinition, looking at the word learning with some of Lisa Lahey's comments about development and differentiating development from learning. I think it's a really worthwhile look at this idea that adults continue to learn and grow if they intend and try to do. And the world often asks us to respond to demands that grow us by growing ourselves, by learning to manage more complexity, to think in more nuanced ways, including about things that we already know how to do, listen and give feedback. Can we do it in a way that meets the moment and meets the demands? And so that brings me to think about the pretty intense context of the world, a world at war, and the political unrest in many places, including this season happened during an election season in the US. And often in the work that I do, even though some of the classrooms that I create, the spaces that I create for learning and development really focus on here and now. So the energy points towards the group and the conversations that are happening in the room. There are always reflections and energy that reflects the external context. So there was a considerable amount of kind of conversation and energy reflected from the intensity of a world where there was a lot of fear and threat and worry and reactivity. And so the through line here is it's hard to be able to create a kind of sense of reflection and calm and attunement when there's a sense of being backed up against the wall and just too busy. That really feels worth paying attention to. One of the things that I've heard most often from executives that I've worked with is how little time there is for reflection. And one of the practices of making time for reflection, I feel like I'm revisiting the importance of that. Time for reflection, time to be in good shape. Sometimes I call my work the leadership gym. And part of the energy of the leadership gym is a practice of mindfulness and intention. And I feel like I'm relearning how much effort and energy it really takes to keep that in place, since I myself lost touch with some of that during this very busy and demanding time. So learning through experience and reflection. Love to pay attention to keeping that in place as a practice. The word that just came up that reminds me of several of the conversations. Most focused, it reminds me of the conversation this season with Mark Brackett, and speaking about exploring themes with him around emotional intelligence. He specifically was talking about attunement, in part because I was interested in talking about attunement and the deeper levels of practice to be able to be aware of your world and to be able to name what's happening in emotion terms. And for me, that very much connects with learning through your own experience of your emotions, that your emotions can teach you and invite you to notice and name what's happening for you, and therefore perhaps be a little bit more aware of your impact on others, to be able to notice and name your impact through the experience of others, so we can kind of work by becoming more aware and responsible for our impact. What else is with me? Spent some time talking with Liliana and with Jenny Frederick, two important senior leaders on the Yale campus who are involved with, I'm pausing because I call them senior leaders, and there's a way in which the hierarchy structure, they are not necessarily on the top team at Yale, and because I follow a logic of everyone leads, they're important in what they are doing in the conversation at Yale in their domains. And so with Liliana leading some of the energy around pedagogy through the UAG, the Yale University Art Gallery. And I just love the energy of the arts inviting us in, and sitting with some of her energy around historical objects and learning with and from our experience with objects. And then turning to the conversation with Jenny Frederick. And part of what stays with me is her excitement about the definition of education, this kind of experience with the definition of education that's about enlightenment, about an enlightening experience. There's a theme of not just thinking of education and learning as facts and novel information, really core to this podcast, that our experience gives us a chance to notice life, and in Jenny's language, to be more enlightened by our experiences. It's probably worth mentioning a couple of other things that came up. One, the conversation with Avi Kluger, which really impacted me. It really felt like an experience with a guest that I know a little bit less, though I feel like I know him a lot more now. Really enjoyed that conversation, and his more unique experience of talking about feedback the way that he does, and how explicitly he connects it to his life experience of some difficult early experiences, and therefore some healthy skepticism about the use of feedback and how responsible we need to be about delivering it with kindness and empathy and connection, and how that also connects to his work around listening. And then that takes me to remembering my also experience with Kim Weston and her health and near-death experiences that took her into a new level of the way that she experiences and produces her art. So a bunch of amazing conversations, I thought, in season 3, and some behind the scenes work that's not as evident, I hope, to the people who are listening in. Takes me to some thanks to some great students who inspired some of these themes and questions. Did a lot of teaching this semester. So the interpersonal group dynamics course had at least 3 versions that were happening on campus, as well as the group that just met in the south of France which is less Yale involved, but part of the work that I do in the world that was more senior executive group. I just love the energy that comes up in these learning spaces. And thanks to all of the people who brought amazing learning and real personal risk taking for the sake of personal growth and development. And then thanks to the team, to Jen and to Alan, who are on the Stern team, to Ben at Yale, and to all of the people who make this happen, including the incoming associate director of my work at Yale in People, the program for the practice of everyday leadership. And welcome to Stacey Williams-Casamassina, who's coming in the new year. And we end 2024 with a little bit, for me, of a sigh of relief and a lot of gratitude. Thanks for everyone who's listening and for all of the wonderful comments and encouragement. And look forward to seeing you in the new year and in the new season. Happy 2025. See you soon.